Right, hello everyone. Thanks for staying on for this session. Slightly depleted numbers, so that's even better. Quality rather than quantity. My name's Sue Hessey. I co-wrote this paper with my colleagues Hazel and Rob. I'm a HCI researcher in BT. I like to say I'm the only pure HCI researcher in BT. There are various other usability groups, etc., that exist, but in terms of strategic research, it's basically myself. My colleague Hazel does a lot of qualitative work with SMEs down in Cornwall, where she lives, and my colleague Rob is in external innovation, which essentially is an arm of the company that does things like technology scouting, etc. But this case study is giving you kind of a warts and all view of the challenges that we had in a recent trial with some elderly participants. So I will take you through it, and hopefully you'll have lots of questions afterwards. So the reasons why you would do this has been covered in some detail, not least by Jessie this morning and other presenters since. These statistics came from Age UK, and everyone knows this. Society is changing, it's aging. This is a global phenomenon. These stats reflect the UK particularly, and I have some here. Between 2015 and 2020, the projection is there's going to be a general population rise of 3%. Those aged over 65 is going to increase by 12%. Over 85, so I think that's called fourth age now, from what I've learnt this morning, 18%. Centenarians, 40%, which is a good thing that we're living longer, but obviously it comes with a lot of complexity and problems that are involved with getting older. The worrying thing is that there is actually a correlated statistic around the incidence of loneliness and social isolation that goes with these, with the good parts of us living longer. In particular, what we see here. So, for example, about 12% say they suffer loneliness, they feel lonely, a lot of the time feel cut off from society. Say 14% of over 65 say that the TV or a pet is the only means of companionship, which is a very sad tale. But then as a partner dies and social networks decline, these are the things that happen. And in terms of healthcare, you are about 14% more likely to die prematurely if you're lonely as well. So there are lots of implications here for general well-being within the population, but also implications for the NHS in having to support illnesses that are compounded by feelings of social isolation. So, where does BT come into this? So I represent a very large commercial organisation that you all know. We offer loads and loads of products, probably products that you don't even know about as well. So the graphic on the left there was one of our first inclusive products, with a very nice gentleman there with his Brill cream on his phone. But also the product next to it is called the Big Button Phone. It was one of the most successful products that BT's ever done, not necessarily because it's inclusively designed, or maybe because it's inclusively designed. It's like everyone really loves it, and it flew off the shelves. It was actually designed for visually impaired people. And then on the left, far left, is a guy engaging with telehealth services. So I think he was uploading his blood pressure to a doctor at some distance away using a telepresence system, and the doctor was looking after him remotely. That clip is on YouTube. I think it was BBC North that actually had that. So loads of assisted technologies and all these combined services as well. And it being a commercial organisation, we have to keep involving the product set. Products that are not very successful get put on the back burner, and we're always looking to involve, to grow the product set. So the combination of factors here. Society's ageing, we can deliver products, we can utilise a big infrastructure. What can we do about it? And the other massive advantage to public sector is that if we can reduce these incidences of illness due to social isolation, we can actually save the NHS together about 1.2 billion over the next 5 years, was a quote from Paul Burstow. So just quickly, I'll go over the trial, not in huge amounts of detail. I'm not going to go into necessarily the findings of the trial. That's the subject of a whole other paper. So here I'm just talking about the challenges of the trial. So we set out with really good objectives. We wanted to capture the benefits of using the TV and video chat over the TV with a specific user group, and we chose socially isolated older people. To evaluate user experience, to understand the usage models, say, is there a novelty in this? Do people really engage with it early on and then it tails off? Is it just for special occasions? Is it just for Christmas, birthday, etc.? And also for them to tell us what they think could be improved or what they thought was rubbish as well. So you can sort of do that in the next product iteration, reflect those opinions. We also want to identify geographic and demographic issues. There's lots of issues in Cornwall. Not least geographically, because it is very remote for Britain. For those people who live in far bigger countries than Britain, for Britain, it's very remote. The motorway ends at Exeter. There's only 2 major roads. The rail transport system's really not very good. Loads of granite in the earth, which prevents a lot of fibre optic cable infrastructure. There's been lots of EU investment in infrastructure, but not necessarily all taken up at the right time. Lots and lots of issues with Cornwall. And then completely, obviously, we wanted to conduct this trial and treat the data that we collected ethically and with privacy and with respect to the participants. So just to recap about Cornwall, another good reason for choosing Cornwall, 1 in 4 is over 65 years old. They may or may not have lived there all their lives. Some people retire to Cornwall. I think this point was made earlier on about retiring to rural areas, which is nice to live by the sea, but also comes with a lot of issues about availability of healthcare resources. We had some established stakeholders in place, people like BT Cornwall, which is a joint venture offering assisted living services. And we also, as I say, have a support infrastructure delivered through those people as well. So the technology is deliberately quite simple. So our intention was to have video over TV delivered via Skype. So this box on the left, that's all it did. There's no other functionality. It's just enables Skype to be used over a TV interface. The company we work with is an American-based company, allowed us to change the UI so that we removed their logo, which meant nothing to the participants, removed things like IP addresses that were on there, meant nothing to the participants, put our own branding on, things like that. They were very receptive. And the use of the participants' own TV was absolutely crucial for it to be, we took away that part of the barrier. So they all had TVs, they all knew how to use their TVs on a lot of the time, so that's kind of an obvious interface to use this through. And as part of the terms and conditions, we said for those who didn't have a high-speed internet connection, which they needed, we'd provide it to them. So that's either via fibre to the cabinet or fibre to the premises. And fibre to the premises was actually really difficult to achieve, even though it would give theoretically the best performance. Actually, physically installing a cable through the granite of the Cornish countryside was extremely hard. But that's a sort of technical issue. Underpinned by all of that is this brand called Alfie Connect, which was an existing brand in Cornwall. Assisted living for independence, so lots of telecare services already offered to the Cornish elderly population. So we were kind of riding on the back of that brand awareness, without it being a sellable product at the time. Again, not going to go into huge detail about the trial itself, but we had 10 participants, as you can see, an age range of 70 to 95. One of them was actually about 55, but she ran a residential facility for people to come and live with her who were elderly and vulnerable. 6 of them had medical conditions. One of them had MS, for example. A couple suffered deafness, visual impairments. A couple had suffered strokes. And 2 others dropped out for various reasons, which happened to older people, like their partners were very sick, so they couldn't engage with the trial very much. I will say this, it's not on the slide. We intended to get 50 participants. Again, I accept that's not going to be statistically relevant for a quantitative survey, but the issues we had with our recruitment prevented us from getting to that number. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. So we accepted 10 as a first pass. You can get a lot of depth with 10 participants. So I will concentrate on 3 of the major challenges. There is a 4th that's in the paper which talked about technical and organisational issues, but I think that's kind of beyond the scope for this. You can read about that in the paper if you wish. So first of all, gaining ethical approval to even start the trial. Now, of course, from BT's perspective, we're a very large public organisation and we have a great interest in being very ethical and rigorous in our research for lots of reasons. You know, we don't want to be seen to be exploitative in any way, especially when the end result may be a sellable product. You know, we are also working with local teams so that all user needs are taken into account. It's for their benefit as well. But as you can see, there was a large and diverse number of people involved in the ethical approval process. And it also had to be that every single party was signed up and agreed to absolutely everything that was in the approval, apart from, I would say, the device vendor and the ISP. So as much as their stakeholders are interested in the end result, they're not necessarily as interested in the ethical part of it because we had contractual agreements with them. So it kind of divorces you from the ethical discussion into a legal discussion. So we'll put them to one side. So down the left-hand side are the BT teams, all of whom have their own hierarchies, all of whom have their own objectives, all of whom have their own performance management and everything else. There's us in the middle trying to coordinate everything. And then on the right are the less commercial organisations, absolutely fundamental in helping us achieve the trial, who have the biggest stake in the ethics approval. They're the ones closest to the end users, the participants. In the context of the charity, they were already running their own exercise for investigating social isolation, but through non-technical means. So we absolutely had to adhere to what they were already doing in their own ethical boundaries. So a very, very complex set of stakeholders who we had to completely gain agreement across all of. And this, well, I won't go through all of this. This is just one example of the 20 documents that we had to get in place for the ethical approval procedure. And we were fortunate that we actually had a university professor who talked us through the ethical procedure through Plymouth University. So he'd done lots of work with engaging elderly people, and he saw us through the whole kind of process, thankfully. So the approval document was one in itself. On top of that, these other 20 documents that we had to submit, which is very good. It means complete rigour, complete agreement. Now, this is just one of the 20, okay? And in here, I'm not going to go through all of it, don't worry, but you can see there are 2 levels of consent needed. There are various different data handoffs, data ownership, and then only at the very end of this big, long process can we actually then go and commission someone to install devices. So this is before the trial has even got underway, is this very, very lengthy procedure. Underpinned with all of that is who at what point has which bit of the data. So us in the middle, the research team basically had all of the data, but it could not be transferred. BT Cornwall, who actually did the device installation, had some of the data, so they could actually go out, make arrangements with the participant to come and install. The ISP had another little bit of the data, so they knew when to go and install the fibre. It was nailed down, like, in completeness every step of the way. Oh, I must say, on top of that, just referring back to the charity, who had their own procedure, we also deal with housing associations as the referral partners. BT could not engage directly with the participants, that's what I meant to say earlier on. We had to work through the charity or local housing associations or outreach programmes. The level of engagement they had with participants was different between them as well. So the charity would be dealing on a day-to-day basis with participants in support. The local housing associations would be dealing with them maybe sort of every month about housing issues, so not that much knowledge about the participant. The outreach programmes maybe saw them once a week, but for educational purposes at the village hall. So you have 3 completely different perspectives on engagement. And each one of them had their own opinions on what the ethics should be. But bringing it all together was fine, and we managed that. The next stage was about resource and ability to engage. So the charity, fine, they saw people a lot. Housing association, well, we've only got 4 people in the association. You can't expect us to go round once to give them a leaflet, 2 days later to ask them whether they read the leaflet, 3rd time to go and get a signed piece of paper to say, yeah, exactly. So a lot of relationship management had gone on here so that we all got to a cohesive set of agreements. what I was saying about the 20 documents, these ranged from an original leaflet to the participants to explain what the proposal was, written in tone and consistency that was acceptable and accessible to everyone, an equipment overview so that the participant referrer could actually take an objective view of whether this person's setup was okay at home, whether the TV was next to the socket that was going to come in through the wall, some sort of technical details, the interview guides, the letters, etc., etc. So very, very complicated. But it all got signed off and it was all fine. Now we come to the second challenge about trust. And this goes into a slightly more philosophical argument now about the challenges. That us as a research team were trusting our referrers, with whom we had a goodwill relationship, no money was exchanging hands, to be able to identify and engage and sign up participants on our behalf, okay? So we trusted them to do that. They had the contacts, they were very good people, they were lovely, on the ground, perfect. But they also had to trust us that we would deliver what we said we would deliver, that we'd treat the data ethically, soundly, that we wouldn't expose the participants in any way or exploit them in any way, completely nailed down, and that the technology that we provided would be usable, would be reliable, would be there when they needed it. The participants had to trust their referrer that they were not being handed off something they couldn't use, that was going to invade their lives, that was going to be annoying, that what they got out of it would be useful. And every level of that trust that you see there came with an associated risk. And because we didn't have access to the end participants until they had actually signed up, until we could go out and install the devices, we could not manage or preempt what would happen at any of those stages. And everything was based on trying to go back to theoretical assumptions about technology adoption, about relationship management, etc., etc. But we had to manage the risk. And it's a very kind of philosophical concept, doesn't exist in BT very much. It's kind of very commercially focused. But of course, I'm a social scientist by background, and my colleague Hazel is a psychologist, and so this was very, very important to us to get it right. Finally, technology engagement. So when you actually get to the trial itself, is what did these people say back to us? I'm not going to go into all the usability issues because they're long and varied. But engagement with it once it was in, we assumed a lot. Oh, this will open the door for socially isolated people. It's an easy product to use. Yeah, it'll all be fine. No, of course it wasn't. Assumptions shattered all around. The whole social structure, the whole social context of these people is what really, really needed to be understood. It was actually quite inconvenient a lot of the time. You would think Skype on TV, oh, it's fine, just tip the TV on, talk to someone. No. They have very wide family contacts and networks, some of whom don't want to speak to them. Some of them can't speak to them because they're at work. Some have children running around. Okay, I can't talk to you now, Mum, sorry, I'm cooking the dinner. Time zones. We actively recruited people whose relatives lived in Australia, America, whatever. But of course, when one's asleep, the other one's awake, and things like that, Deterioration of social networks. Well, of course, the older someone gets, the smaller the network becomes. And it seemed to be that they needed a critical mass of a network to even be able to use the service. Said, well, I only know 2 people and they live down the road. So, okay, what about talking to those people? Well, I don't really need to, I can go down the road and talk to them. Privacy. TV, a video over TV. There was one participant who was bedbound, and she didn't want to be seen even by her own relatives sitting up in bed. There was another one who'd lost a tooth. She said, I'm not going on. Oh, God, I look terrible. I'm not going on. All my wrinkles show as well. It's really awful. Lots of issues that we didn't really foresee. I thought, well, of course, we get that now. The whole social context of it is absolutely vital. And the other thing is there's no local support. Through organisational issues, it turned out that we had no one on the ground to help. So if there was any problem with it, we had to do it all over the phone from Ipswich to Cornwall, about 500 miles. Our project manager literally had to drive down and fix people's problems and drive all the way back again. So those are really important things. Local support, local community, even for this thing that was supposed to expand the social network, really important. Really quickly about the trial outcomes. So it seemed that when they used it, everyone did enjoy using it, which was a really, really good thing. Everyone had a very small number of contacts. As I said before, curtailed by the number of potential contacts. In this age group, people die, peers die. So friends were kind of off radar, really. And those who had a relatively rich local social environment actually experienced exactly the same barriers and problems that those who didn't. So with regard to, it's a bit of a pain to set it up, it may not be convenient, they all said the same kind of thing. But some really nice quotes. Someone said it's wonderful. God, we were so happy. And you can learn a lot more face-to-face than on the phone. Yes, you can see a lot. And then one of our star participants who kept talking to her cousin in Norway was telling me about how he had shown her on his iPad around the garden and saying, look, it's been snowing, stuff like that. And this was this lady that said the family are all there down one end of the room, all waving and shouting hi. That's exactly what we always wanted to hear. So there were some really good stories as well. Okay, so the conclusion. Absolutely, an end-to-end service is required with local support, local people to go and help, local people to ask questions of. I don't know who was in the session earlier on when I said about the Metrolink, where that lady said to me, well, there's no one to ask, is there? So it's a really good point. A help screen's fine, but there's no one to ask. The capability of integrating with our smart home and devices and things like that, I think, is really important. This on its own probably wasn't enough to address the objective, which was to address social isolation. It's bigger than that. There are bigger things that need to be incorporated. And BT as a channel to market is probably not appropriate. It's probably more appropriate to sell it through a trusted provider like a charity. Not that we're not trusted, but when you're talking about products like this, it's probably more appropriate for it to come through NHS, local council, charity, etc. I will refer back to a project we did 2 years before this, where we had 27 participants in a very similar kind of setup. The recruitment was entirely done by a GP. And everyone he asked signed up immediately. And the person that actually went out and then did the ongoing engagement was one person from the Red Cross. And she was fantastic. And she knew all the participants by name. If something went wrong, they'd phone Marie, and she'd phone one of us who'd go and help. But it worked so much better. And it was local. It was Felixstowe, about 10 miles down the road for us. But interestingly, what authority did the GP have in that trust relationship compared to what we experienced here? I think it was massive, massive. But anyway, we also have opportunities to explore with other populations. I think it's been mentioned before about autistic populations are very adept at dealing with screen interfaces. And it'd be a really interesting experiment to see what we can do with them. So finally, and this is important, trust and technology adoption. In the paper, we talk about the importance of user engagement. I think it's really, really important. We, as a lot of time happens in BT, get engaged at a far later stage than was intended. It's significant for public sector when you've got a large amount of investment going on, and also for securing trust between us as a provider and trust in the device, trust with the supply, etc. Engaging beyond potential users, this has been mentioned as well, about children and carers, because it's quite a big thing for an elderly person to admit they're isolated or they need help or anything like that. It's an admission of declining faculties, which no one wants to do. It's like stopping driving. You know you're never going to do it again. It's probably quite a shattering thing. And it's often the children, the carers are the ones that notice. And they're the ones that are influential, will probably buy the product, will probably support the product when it goes wrong, will probably be the ones setting up the contractual arrangements. And the end user is literally just that, the user of it. And when it goes wrong, oh my God, I'll just phone up son or daughter. That's usually how it happens. Trust between all the stakeholders, absolutely, with appropriate benefits of what that relationship's going to bring to you. And allow time for the relationships. I think the problem with this, we didn't have a lot of time to build relationships with the local partners. It was a lot of handshaking, a lot of verbal agreements. We were trying to avoid contractual agreements per se. As a result, it felt too rushed. And I think if we'd had time to build it, get to know each other a lot better, it probably would have been more successful all round. Not that it wasn't successful, we learned a lot. But I just think that's a really important element. It's a bit of a luxury in a company like BT to have time to do that when you have sort of product cycles that run you ragged. But I think it's a really important point that you can't rush these things. Anyway, thank you for listening. That's it from me. Questions? There's no one to facilitate and no one to hand out microphones. unless there is. Oh, I beg your pardon, I did see you at the back. You okay? I'll facilitate myself, shall I? No? No? Oh, there is one.
For what duration were these
It was ideally for 1 year, but as it turned out, it was anywhere between, I think we'd done it, between about 12 and 18 months. But we had a rolling record of who had been installed, so we knew at the end of a year that we'd be able to go back and interview them. To be honest, it was quite fluid. It was...
So, on the other side of that, you put this in the elderly person's home and they want to contact their grandchildren in Australia. I mean, we're Australian.
Mm-hmm.
Did the people at the other end need something to be able to connect with them?
Absolutely.
And how did that work?
That's exactly another big assumption, that the people on the other end would be able to, technically, and inclined to engage in a Skype conversation. So that was a big challenge, an assumption that we should not have made. But you don't want to be too invasive in the questions when you're gaining the participant approval in the first place. Say, well, are all your family on Skype? They probably don't know. And it's kind of like an organic approach, and then it's finding them. It's like the contacts, it's the request and things like that. A lot of the time our participants waited for a request to come in that they just said yes, rather than actively looking for people. So yes, it's going back to the whole kind of looking at the social context. It has to be all inclusive. That's a good point. Hi.
So this was a trial, and it had a finite length of time. Is the plan ultimately to roll this out to people in Britain, or what was the plan of doing this?
From a commercial perspective, the output of the trial was to feed into a business case for it to be developed as a product. And it would have been run by an arm of the company which deal a lot with public sector. I think how it's turned out since we input into that business case, it's that more valid as a proposition within telecare and telehealth. So it's probably not in itself going to be developed as a product. It's probably, there are lots of telecare and telehealth trials and propositions going on, of which this element would be a part. So, yeah.
I'm actually really excited about the possibilities of this. While I'm over here, my fiance is trying to organise a time to take his laptop to my mother's nursing home and set her up somehow with a Skype conversation with me, and that's still somehow in the process of working out if that was something that was available to people. Now I know you're talking about Britain, I'm talking about Australia. If that was something that was available for elderly people in nursing homes or in their own homes, I think that would be a wonderful, wonderful, exciting thing to be happening.
Yeah, and using a technology that's already there as well, like the TV, because having a laptop set up is great. That's a really lovely intention to have, to connect your family across the seas and everything. But I think using the TV was like the biggest pull. Yeah, I mean, I have belief in it, but then, I'm not a business manager. I am merely a researcher. But it's really important to get this feedback as well, because there were some really good outcomes from this as well, and it would be a shame to not see it taken forward. Yeah, I agree. Okay. Hi, Jessie. There's a question there. Oh God, I'm overrunning, Ollie. Sorry.
Thank you. That was a really, really good talk. Thank you. I just wanted to ask a little bit, when you were talking about conduits and carers and people helping out, that in I didn't do a lot of research into this, but just initially one pattern that I began to notice was that those who were a bit more savvy and adopting things quite nicely were particularly women, but who had a strong male presence, in the family, their son-in-law, husband, brother-in-law, and that's how they kind of facilitated their knowledge. I mean, did you find a similar thing?
Yeah, a lot of kind of sons getting involved and helping out, especially if like a widow who'd lost her husband, feeling less confident, etc., especially if he was the breadwinner and the kind of the main instigator for any purchase or acquisition in the home. So absolutely, there was the lady who was our best user, I think had 4 sons, and they were her tech support. So absolutely, I wouldn't have expected her to sort out the problems that she had, but she absolutely leaned on them, yeah.
That's really interesting stuff. There's another project really similar to this that Age UK are doing in Cheshire, so that might be some, tap up with them maybe.
Yeah, they were one of our partners, yeah, so that's good, yeah. All right, sorry, Olive, I've eaten into the next slot, which is Ollie, and so I'm kind of facilitating now. I didn't expect to be, but here we are. Thank you, everyone.